selling protection when cost is an issue. Now what I've done is I've put 3 parts to our protection selling. When you're selling protection, advising on protection, there's structure to follow, of course there is. Now I've got 3 parts here. We've got sowing the seed, which is part 1, coaching the protection gap, that's the fact find, and here is presenting the package. So when you're advising on protection, they're the 3 steps you should take. Now this could be alongside a mortgage, or it could be on its own. It doesn't really matter. So sowing the seed is when you are just introducing yourself and you're putting across your proposition, what you're all about, etc. And there's many things that we talk about in that one. But one thing we talk about there is to sow the seed as to what you do and how you operate. In other words, you are a mortgage and protection advisor. Your job is to arrange the right finance for people, but also to make sure they get to keep the house in the event of anything that's thrown at them, life throws them, like death, illness, that sort of thing. We want you to keep your property and have a mortgage protected. So that's my job. That's what I do. So you've got to still do that. But what we like to do now is start to talk about affordability. We talk about budgets at this early point. And many mortgage advisors in the first few minutes of discussion will talk about customers' budget, really. You're looking to buy this house, what sort of budget do you have in mind? And many people have worked around rent, for example, or sort of a monthly payment. They think they can pay for everything. And they try to include the protection in this budget, like a whole budget. It's a very good thing to do. And the kind of things you can talk about at this point is, well, you could certainly talk about other things that people protect, because you're talking about contrast here, aren't you? What else do they protect? Do they insure their car? Do they insure their house? Do they insure their pets? You can certainly look at the protection sort of subject, can't you? But it's important to assert the point here now that protection is going to cost some money, and it's about sacrificing things in their life. Looking at their net disposable income. So have a discussion around that as well. If the initial budget they give you is quite low, you might want to start bidding that up a bit. Interest rates have increased since your last mortgage, so you really will be wanting to look at a slightly higher monthly payment for that one. The ballpark figure for that would be about this. How does that sound? Oh, that's a lot of money, isn't it? Well, that does include your protection as well. What else do you protect? You have protection for things like your house, your car. It's going to cost a few extra pounds to cover that now. So just getting them used to the fact that the budget the budget they're going to give you needs to be a lot more probably than what they're working towards. So that's the first thing you want to do, is start talking about the budget when you're sowing the seed, but also the fact it's going to cost a little bit more. Sometimes in life you have to make the odd sacrifice. Sacrifice your morning latte, for example, because there's more sugar in a latte apparently than a cream cake. I read that the weekend. So you could certainly talk about that. Get them used to it. That's all. You're just preempting their thoughts. You haven't even given any quotes yet. Of course you haven't. The next thing you start to do then is coaching the gap. Now this is where you fact find to find out what happens to them, because they've got this amount of cover, they need that amount of cover, there's a big gap. If they don't fill the gap, there's going to be trouble ahead. That's the whole point behind it. And we ask that you have an affordability discussion. You might do an assessment, a proper decision in principle thing if you're remortgaging, and it's then that you start talking about other things. Now when you're fact finding and you're asking questions about their age and their occupation, you can chip in little things. So for example, let's just put a little idea. You can chip in when you're fact finding. Fact finding. Their age, but their age, their occupation. You could say so. You're very young, aren't you? That means any cost for life insurance is going to be really low. That's good news for you. Or if they've got an occupation that's quite dangerous, you could say, well, actually that occupation's quite dangerous, isn't it? So protection costs can be slightly more there. So we might need to look at maybe increasing your budget for that. So you can have a conversation about costs as you fact find. Again, all you're doing is you're getting their mind used to the fact it's going to cost a little bit more probably, or they need to find some extra money to pay for it. Now, when you're protecting, or when you're coaching the gap and you're talking about the effect of them dying and what's going to happen to the kids, etc., you can certainly talk about protecting yourself might cost a few extra pounds than you thought about. So if this is important to you, have a think about how much extra you could pay towards this. You gave me a budget of £1,100 to start with yesterday. Is there any more that you could find to be able to make sure you're fully protected? Another £50, £75 maybe in your mind? Okay, we could probably squeeze another 70. Okay, so a budget of £1,175 then is what we're looking at now, is it? Yeah, that's right. So you certainly want to, if you like, refresh the budget they gave you earlier as you begin to fact find, particularly as you're coaching the gap. Because when you're coaching the gap, they start to realise the need for the insurance and the impact it will have on their life. So start to refresh the gap at that point. The other thing you can do towards the end of coaching the gap, and we call this the vicar close. I talk about that quite a lot, don't I? The vicar close. This is where you're gaining commitment from the client without seeing any numbers. You haven't done any options or quotations, have you? And here you might sort of say something like, if I get some great ideas together for you and look at some costings, if the total cost is a little bit more than your budget, how would you feel about still going ahead with that? That's what we call the vicar close. What you're saying to them is, look, I'm going to do some quotes. I know from my mind that it's going to be high because of your age, etc. And if they are slightly more than what you've talked about in your budget, would you still be wanting to go ahead? That's what he's saying. You're not saying, here's the numbers. Do you want to go ahead? You're saying, look, I'm going to get some ideas together, some options, some quotes, whatever. And if they are a little bit more than what we've talked about, your budget, monthly budget, how would you feel about that? Are you still wanting to go ahead with that? So in other words, you're doing a vicar close because you haven't even shown them the details yet. When it comes to presenting the package or whatever you want to do, a lot of advisors use sweet spot pricing. Sweet spot pricing. I've talked about this before. Now, sweet spot pricing is where you have three different prices, don't you? You have your platinum, your gold, your silver, whatever you want to call them. It's three, really, really expensive, a massive platinum, everything you've ever, like a CMAP version, costs hundreds of pounds. Then right at the bottom you have this really cheap and cheerful one, with no bells and whistles, completely bolted down to be the cheapest possible, really sort of like irksomely cheap. And then in the middle you have a plan that fits the budget, that gives them the cover they need. Might not be everything they would like in an ideal world, but it does give them the right amount of cover that you've spoken about, within-ish the budget that you talked about. And of course you then can look at which one would you like to go for, and people tend to go for the middle one because that's the way people roll, isn't it? I mean, keep the cost down. Take a look at multi-plans, for example. So find an insurance company that does income protection and life combined or something, or critical illness and life combined. Try and bring the cost down that way by doing a multi-plan to keep the fees, the monthly policy fees down as well. And if you want to express it in a bit corny, but express it weekly if you want to, or daily. It's a little bit corny, isn't it? Rather than £100 a month, you could say, well, this is just over £3.25 a day. A cost of a latte, actually it's probably cost of half a latte, isn't it? A bit corny, but it does bring it to life to people. Because the whole point is you're presenting a whole budget. If it's a mortgage and protection, the whole thing together. It's all about the budget at the early doors. That's the key. And mortgage advisors tell me that when they get a budget early doors and the budget is enough, they can tend to look at a good recommendation later down the line, because you're just preempting the customer's mind, don't you, to think about that. Here, remember, you want to do something about bidding up that budget. You want to encourage them to think about it a little bit more very early on, before you even talked about the gap, etc. Get them used to the fact they need to be paying a little bit more money as well along the way. And at the end of the day, I think, personally, that it all comes down to the gap, isn't it? If the customer sees the need, they really do understand what's going to happen to them if they die or become ill, and they've got kids and they've got house, etc. They need the protection. And they understand that. It's all about cost-benefit analysis, isn't it? Yes, it's going to cost them, but there's a massive benefit to them. But if they really can't afford it, of course, and they want to go online and get it cheaper, then you can do ways of bringing it down maybe, or at least bidding up the budget, maybe sacrificing some of the other things they pay for in order to get protection. So it comes down to the assertiveness of your advice. I hope that's been useful for you.